Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Theresa May said something that is generally considered highly unlikely today. Speaking to journalists on her trip to Japan, she said she will be leading the Tory party into the next election. Now, that's not the conventional view, which I think is that the Tories will dump her ignominiously just as soon as she has taken all the blame for any U-turns or Brexit chaos that may be coming the government's way, thus leaving a clean slate for a new leader. But what a statement for her to make, an attempt to stamp some authority on the party as we all get back from holidays. Is it conceivable that she will lead the party for years to come? Or is it just an inevitable political ritual that Prime Ministers have to pretend as much? Well, here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
There must be something magical about the Alpine air. An emboldened Theresa May has returned from her summer holiday to reset the dial on her faltering premiership by making plain, I am not a quitter.
Do you intend to fight the next election?
Yes, there's been an awful lot of speculation about my future, which has no basis in it whatsoever. I'm in this for the long term. There's a real job to be done in the United Kingdom. It's about getting the Brexit deal right. It's about building that deep and special partnership with the European Union for the future. But it's also about building global Britain, trading around the world, yes, dealing with injustices that remain inside the United Kingdom.
The number of votes cast for each...
It's all a far cry from the diminished figure who emerged shell-shocked from the disaster of her general election campaign. The Prime Minister briefly contemplated resigning and struggled to connect after the Grenfell disaster. Theresa May's remarks today stand in stark contrast to her sheepish declaration to Tory MPs in the early summer that she would simply serve at their pleasure. Back then, the Prime Minister spoke of her duty to see out the Brexit negotiations, raising expectations that she would leave shortly after the two-year deadline in 2019. Now the Prime Minister wants to deliver not just Brexit, but also an ambitious agenda of domestic reforms. One leading Brexiteer believes the Prime Minister's holiday has worked wonders.
I think she's got a new lease of life, walking in the hills of, was it Switzerland? Then she's done, yeah, I think she's doing remarkably well.
And Peter Bone, who was recently entertained to summer drinks by the Prime Minister at Chequers, believes she is wholeheartedly committed to Brexit.
You know what these meetings are about. It's nice to see the Prime Minister, but I was amazed at how the one thing that she was fired up about, the one thing that's definitely going to happen is Brexit. And, you know, her eyes sparkled at the thought of it. And I thought, wow, this is just what we need. And if there was anyone who had any doubt, they should have been at that meeting. She's going to deliver us Brexit. If she delivered Brexit, and I think she will be a national hero. And then why not carry on? I have not heard a single person of all my backbench colleagues saying we have to get rid of the Prime Minister, we have to have a new leader, and it has to be he or she. Just isn't there. There is no plotting. And by the way, I think if plotting was going on, I'd probably know about it.
A former advisor to David Cameron, with some painful memories from his time in Downing Street, understands the tactics in seeking to avoid a lame duck premiership.
No Prime Minister ever wants to get themselves into a situation where they're setting a date for their departure. And my old boss David Cameron discovered that to his cost in 2015, where he said he wouldn't serve a full term.
But Sir Craig Oliver wonders whether the mixed messages from a Prime Minister who, after all, does not command a parliamentary majority will actually work.
The problem for Theresa May is that she's basically had a narrative in Westminster for the last few months that she's going to go after the Brexit negotiations. It's actually what's been assumed in the Conservative Party. And the thing about being so assertive now is that lots of people are going to say, hold on a minute, I thought you were going to go. I thought we weren't going to be in a position where you were going to fight the next election. And they're going to say that's probably a problem for them.
The hills are alive with the sound of the Prime Minister thinking very carefully about her future. Theresa May hopes to have cemented her position in number 10, but she leads a party with a regicidal streak.
Well, Nick is with me. Nick, should we take this literally? Should we take it seriously? Or what's going on? What's our game?
Well, this is a marked shift in tone and indeed substance from a rather diminished Theresa May we saw after the general election. One thing that is absolutely clear is that the Prime Minister wanted to use this trip to knock on the head a weekend report that she would be gone by August 2019. Why? Because if you name your departure date, as David Cameron and Tony Blair can tell you, there's a danger that you become a lame duck. Whether that means that she really will lead the Conservative Party into the 2022 general election, I'm not too sure. And I think what she was trying to do was chart this very difficult course between not doing a Blair and a Cameron, naming that date, but equally not getting into the Margaret Thatcher territory, who famously said before the 1987 election that she would go on and on and on. It is a perilous and difficult path, and we saw that today.
We haven't had this out in public for very long. She said it to journalists a bit earlier than it was put into the public domain. How's it gone down? Well,
as we know, the Brexiteers, Peter Bone, very happy if she takes the Conservatives into the 2022 general election. But I spoke to one grandee who said to me that the Conservative Party has agreed on two things. There must be no general election for the next 5 years, and anything that causes that is a bad thing and must be avoided. But when that election comes, Theresa May must not lead the Conservative Party. And this person said to me, there is disagreement about when she should go. There's one school of thought that says go now, another school of thought wait to 2019. And that school of thought, the 2019 one, is in the ascendancy.
Nick, thanks.
Theresa May says she will be leading the Conservative Party into the next general election in 2022, claiming last night that she is in this for the long term. Speaking as she began a 3-day trade mission to Japan, the Prime Minister repeated her commitment to getting the right Brexit deal for the UK. Mrs May's desire to spend another 5 years as party boss will come as a surprise to some of her MPs, with some of them calling on her to step down after June's election result. Our senior political correspondent Jason Farrell sent this report from Tokyo.
Theresa May was at the Yokosuka naval port this morning inspecting military personnel and discussing closer UK cooperation with the Japanese armed forces. But as she forges diplomatic ties abroad, she's also trying to restore discipline and loyalty within her own party. In a Sky News interview, she dismissed reports that she intended to resign as Prime Minister after the Brexit negotiations and that she wanted to fight the next general election as leader. There are reports of you standing down in 2 years' time as Prime Minister. Is that fake news?
There's absolutely no basis for those reports whatsoever. I'm in this for the long term because there's a long-term challenge for the United Kingdom. We need to get the Brexit deal right, deliver the right deal for the people of the UK and for everybody within the United Kingdom. But we also need to ensure that after we've left the European Union, global Britain is out there trading around the world, standing tall in the world, and that we deal with some of the remaining injustices at home.
So you want to fight the next election for the Conservatives?
Yes.
Do you rule out any snap leadership election in the coming months or years?
As I've just said, I'm in this for the long term.
Just 2 months ago, she'd refused to commit to fighting the next general election as leader, but this could see her staying on beyond 2022. Well, she may be thousands of miles from Westminster, but her comments here in Japan will resonate back home amongst her party, especially with those who thought she didn't do well enough in the snap election and those who may have their own ambitions for number 10. This could be the catalyst for a leadership bid. Rivals sensed that Theresa May was mortally wounded by her snap election that backfired. The executive editor of Conservative Home said some MPs are already expressing concerns.
One Conservative MP just texted me to say if she can't show she's changed, she won't be the one deciding when her premiership ends. And I think that's what it comes down to. This may be her intention, but ultimately it'll be in the gift of the Conservative Party, first in its MPs and secondly in its members. And I think a lot of them will have assumed that this very much wouldn't be the case, so it'll come as a big surprise.
But former leader William Hague has urged Conservative big beasts to get behind the Prime Minister.
All the time our elected leader, who led us in the last general election in a way that meant we can form a Conservative government, wishes to remain as leader. That's fine by me. And there won't be a leadership election until such time as she resigns, and she made it very clear she's not going to. So anyone who thought they needed to get a leadership campaign ready was wasting their time.
On a trip to Nigeria, the Foreign Secretary said he supported the Prime Minister staying on. On the second day of her visit to Japan, Mrs May will continue to focus on trade and security, announcing that UK troops will exercise jointly with the military here on Japanese soil for the first time ever next year. On this trip, international and domestic party diplomacy are entwined, the Prime Minister signalling she's getting on with a job she has no intention of leaving. Jason Farrell, Sky News, Japan.
Well, the Prime Minister's been busy already this morning. She's been at a Japanese business forum already. Jason has been with her, and he sent us this update from Tokyo a little earlier.
Well, this is a significant change of language from the Prime Minister. In the past, she's talked about being given more time, but not being specific about how long. She said that she would stay on as long as the party wanted her. But now she's saying she does want to lead the Conservatives into the next general election, fairly unambiguously. And that will raise alarms amongst some Conservatives who see her as an electoral liability following the snap election that backfired, where she lost her majority. But here in Japan, she is mixing international diplomacy with party management back home, setting the tone really for conference season, where she hopes people will get behind her. And if she can get through that and then go into the Brexit negotiations and out the other side, then perhaps her leadership will be defined not by a failed snap election, but by the Brexit negotiations. And that perhaps will determine whether she does really stay on as Prime Minister to fight into the next general election.
Let's talk about that future. We're joined from Banbury by the Conservative peer and former Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Heseltine. Lord Heseltine, thanks for your patience and waiting while the press conference came to a conclusion. The Prime Minister says she's not a quitter. She expects to contest the next general election. Is she right?
Well, she says it. She believes she's right. If you're asking for my opinion, then I don't think it's realistic that she will lead the Conservative Party into the next election. I think that we have probably a 2-year window before the next election. Anyone's guess, but my guess is 2 years. And that 2 years will be dominated by 3 issues. First, the economic situation, which is going to decline. Secondly, the levels of immigration, which are at the centre of the Brexit debate. And then, of course, the Brexit negotiations themselves, which are already humiliating, and I think as they unfold and become more detailed, will indicate to people just how unwise the whole Brexit process is. So I don't myself believe that there will be an appetite in particularly the parliamentary party, to rerun the last general election. I think they'll want a new leader, and my advice to them very strongly is they'll also need not just to change the singer, but to change the song. Already the Labour Party have smelt the wind and are beginning to hedge their bets over Brexit.
Some people will say a general election won't happen in 2 years. We now have the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, so it's further away than that. Your characterisation of future economic decline, well, other people have said that the economy would tank after the Brexit vote. It didn't. In fact, hundreds of thousands of jobs have been created.
Yeah, indeed. And how? By increasing credit and debt. We're back where we were in the run-up to the crash. And that is already beginning to send jitters through the economics and the industrial world. The level of confidence is declining. That is the beginning of a movement when people start cutting back on their investment and jobs start being lost. There has been a false situation, I first to admit it, because people have drawn down their savings. But that's now beginning to stop, And with the inflationary pressures developing, possible interest rates increases, then the squeeze will become increasingly uncomfortable. And the politics, I think, will become uncomfortable as well for the government.
Mrs. Thatcher said she would go on and on. You and others famously felt that was a bad idea. You challenged her leadership. Would you encourage somebody now to do what you did and challenge her leadership?
Well, I haven't got a candidate, but somebody will. And it's who knows who it will be.
Well, that's the problem,
without
isn't it?
any doubt.
That is the problem, Lord Heseltine. I mean, you know, this is. We are expecting somebody to take the helm at an incredibly turbulent time in the national story, and we don't have an obvious contender.
That is correct, but that it heightens the risk that Jeremy Corbyn will end up in Downing Street, and so my own feeling about the Conservative Party, very strongly held, is that they are a party of survivors. They're a party that understands the nature of power in politics. And if they see a situation developing along the lines that I think will develop, then they will find somebody. Who it will be, well, it will be largely for them to decide, but it will become obvious when the time is right for the change to take place. But I don't believe that Mrs. May will fight the next election as leader of the Conservative Party.
In the press conference in Tokyo, she just said, "I'm not a quitter. There is a long-term job to be done." She's expressed a determination to some of the journalists travelling with her that she ought to be allowed to develop a domestic political programme above and beyond sorting out Brexit, to define, in a sense, what Mayism is. You feel she has no right to do that?
No, I don't think that at all. I've actually listed the things I think that she should be concentrating on. The problem is that she doesn't have a majority to do anything controversial. But there are things that she could be doing, should be doing. For example, there are far too many failing schools in our country. That doesn't need legislation. It needs proper management. The housing situation could be much better organised than it is, and there's an urgent need for it. I think that the devolution agenda has lost momentum now, and that's very sad, but it is within the gift of government to make a major switch away from London to the big cities and their local economies in the country, recreating the atmosphere and triumphs of the 18th and 19th centuries. London didn't make this country of ours. It was a huge accumulation of very powerful local economies, you know, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Bristol, we all know the names. Give them back the chance to run and design and develop their own economies. That really could excite people. So there are lots of things that she could do, but the fact of the matter is, in terms of the things that she's talking about, like improving the living standards, well, how do you do that with a contracting economy? How do you do that when you've got too much debt and the fear that taxes have to raise? How do you do that when interest rates are about to start rising? So the situation is quite easy to analyse. It's extremely difficult to do a lot about. But putting all that to one side, the issue that will dominate the headlines is the Brexit negotiation. We are severing our connection with Europe in a way that it spits in the face of every Conservative Prime Minister I've ever worked for. They may not have liked the idea of Europe cooperation, Mrs. Thatcher didn't, but she was the one who actually transferred more British sovereignty to the European venture than any of the other Prime Ministers. So the reality is that we are part of the European economy. The Prime Minister's visit to Japan, which we've been listening to and talking about, very interesting. Japan is probably the most protectionist nation of the advanced economic world. The reason the Japanese came here was because the Europeans wouldn't let them into the landmass of Europe. They came to Britain in order to get into the European market. The reason they're in the city of London with their banks is because London is the prime European centre. And both of these issues are now at risk in the Brexit negotiations. So those uncertainties will dominate the dialogue for the rest of this Parliament.
Lord Heseltine, we have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Let's go back to
Thank
Tokyo.
you very much.
Our senior political correspondent, Jason Farrell, listening to the Prime Minister, Jason, say she was no quitter.
Yeah, that's right. And you heard there from Michael Heseltine, there are people in the Conservative Party who think she should quit. He's not alone. Nicky Morgan said the same thing. The former party chair, Grant Shapps, has also suggested that she can't hang on until the next general election. They feel that the snap election was a test for her that she failed. And you'll also notice that so far the people who've come out against her are the more Europhile members of the party. It's the Eurosceptics who've come out in favour of her. We heard from John Redwood earlier supporting her. Boris Johnson has also said that he supports the Prime Minister. So the party is, it seems, dividing down those Brexit lines on this issue over whether Theresa May will stay. And it does seem she's perhaps taking the line of another big beast of the party, Ken Clarke, when he called her a bloody difficult woman. She's decided to be bloody difficult to remove.
Jason, thanks very much indeed. Theresa May has said she wants to stick around and contest the next general election. We interviewed Lord Heseltine about that, invoking memories of Lady Thatcher going on and on and on. Of course, he stood as a challenger. I was going to say he sounded horrified about the idea of Theresa May standing to fight the next election. That's probably too strong, but certainly not happy.
No, not happy at all. And I have to say, your Sky data poll there, finding 28% of respondents think it's a rather good idea that she'll stay on and fight the 2022 general election. And remember, if you fight a 2022 general election, you're possibly winning yourself another 5 more years. So that's 10 more years as Prime Minister she's potentially asking for. You won't find 28% of Tory MPs today agreeing with the Sky data poll, the Sky viewers on that at all. I've done a big ring round this morning so far, and as all my colleagues are doing, and I'm sure your people are doing here in Millbank as well. And you really have to try very hard indeed to persuade a single Tory MP to go on the record and back Theresa all the way to say, yes, she needs to fight the next general election in, potentially five years' time. This has gone down, I think, like a cup of cold sick, really. In my view, it's a miscalculation by Theresa May and her team. I don't think she needed to say this for two reasons. One, the softly approach she's been adopting since the general election, confronting the 1922 committee of Tory MPs and saying, look, it's my fault, I've taken us into this mess, I'll lead it out, blame me, I'm here to serve you, not the other way around. The humility was beginning to work, and she was beginning to rebuild huge amounts of lost respect and authority she had after making a Horlicks of the general election, as we know. That humility appears to have evaporated very quickly indeed with these quite strident comments overnight. The second reason why it's a mistake, in my view, and it would appear Tory MP's view as well, is that precisely this sort of top-down dictatorial approach to governing her party and perhaps her country is exactly what made so many Tory MPs and indeed ministers, cabinet ministers, so fed up with her pre-general election with a very stringent brooking no argument number 10. And this reminds them of all the things they don't like about her, all the dogmatic, very strident leadership, not the convivial love-in, which they've really rather enjoying over the last 2 or 3 months.
Gavin, is it a misstep? She could have just repeated what she'd said to the 22 committee, couldn't she? I'll carry on at your behest until such time as you don't want me anymore.
I think it's one of those great journalistic questions where you can't win either way. Without a doubt, they wanted to get this message out before party conference to allow them to refocus and ensure there was a domestic narrative alongside Brexit. And they would have got this message out before then. It's come slightly early, but it has come out. I see this as a good move. I disagree with Tom. I think it shows the good comms structure that's now in place in Downing Street. They're trying to drive different messages, get back to the subjects of social injustice, trying to break down establishment. That actually worked extremely well for her in advance of the terrible election campaign. There's 3 audiences for this message, remember. There's the public who actually, despite everything in the election campaign, the one positive they said was she wasn't a quitter. This helps reinforce that. Secondly, there's the Tory MPs who are much more difficult to manage. And absolutely, Tom's right. They are sceptical. But the point is, not many are out in the front foot attacking her. They mightn't be believing it, but they're not attacking her, and that's key. And the third audience is, of course, the EU. We've seen that today with these negotiations. It's not going to be easy. For any doubt to be passed over her staying, whether it's to Brexit or beyond, would not be helpful for the negotiations.
OK, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Gavin McGaw, Tom Newton Dunn, thanks both very much indeed. Thanks a lot.
To get some more reaction to this, let's head to Tunbridge Wells to speak to Philip Blond. He's a former advisor to David Cameron and director of Res Publica, excuse me. Thanks so much for joining us, Philip. First of all, Lord Heseltine saying that he thinks he gives Theresa May 2 years. Do you agree with that? She says she wants to stand until 2022 to stand for the general election. Do you think she could do that?
Well, I think she's achieved a number of things with this. As everyone has already said, she at least has not made the mistake that David Cameron made of giving a sell-by date. And she's also raised the political cost of challenging her, which makes her even more safe. Plus, she's also signalled her intent, and I think it's quite clear that she actually does want to stay on. I think she probably feels the general election result deeply. She also feels that she has to make good on the promises that she's undertaken to make. So she wants to do it, and who's to say she won't be able to?
I mean, does she really have to say she's considering or she wants to stay until the 2022 election? Because right now, there wasn't any challenges. The likes of, say, Boris Johnson or David Davis were focusing on the work at hand. Now that she's saying that potentially she's thinking of staying on for that the next general election, you could see the likes of, as I've mentioned, David Davis and Boris Johnson now focusing on any kind of leadership challenge.
Well, I think it makes a leadership challenge harder. But I think the real task for Theresa May, which I don't think she has met, is really, can she deliver on her reform agenda? She said when she went into Downing Street that was her agenda. She outlined it in the manifesto, but in the manifesto there was no big transformative ideas, whereas the Labour Party manifesto was full of them. She really, I think, has to understand why is there a policy stasis in her government. And she has to make a move. If she's being big and bold and brave and saying, I'm going to stay, she can't stay in the way she currently is staying. She's going to have to either remove cabinet opposition or overrule it and deliver at scale big transformative policy ideas. Now, if she does that, if she, for example, solves the housing crisis, then I think we stand a real chance of her actually being in the running for the leadership contest. I mean, nobody else yet has any new ideas in the Conservative leadership. They're all rehashed Thatcherism. They're all kind of versions of the past. So everybody knows we need something new. Now, if May actually has the courage and the stamina and abandons the caution that so far, apart, of course, from the election, calling the election, that marks her reign, if we can call it that, she has a shot. But, she's got to make more bold moves. Just one bold move isn't enough. If she stays as she is, I doubt she'll see her term out. But if she governs with real verve and big new ideas, then she stands a chance.
Yeah, you do get the impression that she's trying to forge some kind of legacy. Maybe get more details on that during the Tory party conference in October. But do you think that she has the loyalty of the party? Does she have enough Tory party members behind her to support her in anything she is planning on doing?
I think if we're being honest, the answer to that is no. And the loyalty that she has at the moment is really from the Brexit wing of the party that sees her now as their best hope of obtaining and delivering on Brexit. So she has the right wing of the Conservative Party. The middle and the left, there is no real kind of left-wing or centre-ground Conservative candidate around which people can rally. All the potential leadership challengers are on the right, but she's the candidate of the right. So she's safe until Brexit. And if I was advising her, I would advise her actually become the candidate of the middle of the party and the left of the party with other bold ideas. And then you might actually be in the running to stay on as leader. Politics is a funny business. If she can deliver Brexit and also deliver social reform at the scale she wants, she oddly could unite both wings of the Conservative Party. I think that's unlikely. I think from what's happened in the past, she looks like she's too hemmed in, whether that's, internal within her or because of external constraints. It's hard to say. It's probably a bit of both. But if she could actually do that, then thinking it through, she would be in a very, very strong position, because who else can unite both wings of the Tory party? It's very hard to see who could.
Yeah, politics is a funny thing, an understatement, I think, and Philip Blondon. But thanks so much for talking to us, and former advisor to David Cameron.
Well, now on our top story, Theresa May has dismissed scepticism from some Conservative MPs over her leadership ambitions. The Prime Minister says she intends to lead the party into the next general election in 2022. That's what she says. And she's reiterated that she has no intention of standing down before then. But can she really hold on? We're joined from Westminster by former Conservative MP Neil Carmichael, who lost his Stroud seat to a Labour candidate at this year's snap election. We're also joined from Somerset by current Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg. Hello to you both. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. To you first, Mr Carmichael, if I may. Can she hold on?
Well, of course, it's important to demonstrate consistency and permanency, if you like. And this is a good time to be saying, look, I'm thinking about going on, because at the moment the political situation is really surprisingly calm. But I do think that there are some risks ahead, because of course Brexit is a very challenging issue, and I think there will be political turbulence around that subject. And of course you can't really predict what kind of events are going to emerge around and about. So it's sensible to think in terms of being Prime Minister and wishing to lead the government, and she's the only person who can, I think, at the moment. I was very, very keen to support her when she first launched her bid, and I think that she's the right person to have as Prime Minister now. But I do think there are risks ahead.
But isn't she the reason you lost your seat?
Well, certainly calling the general election when she did wasn't, I think, the wisest thing to have done. And I think the way in which the campaign actually unfolded was extremely unhelpful. The manifesto was particularly unhelpful because, of course, we didn't talk about the economy, and there's a really good story to tell. We've got over 31 million people employed. The situation with the British economy now is sharply better than it was back in 2010, and I think we should have talked about that. There should have been a narrative about the things that we had done and the plans that we had beyond winning the election when we did. And, of course, the key thing about a good leader is expressing a vision.
You're not answering my question, Mr Carmichael. Sorry to interrupt you there. We know what the manifesto said, and that was then, this is now. Is it her fault you lost your seat?
I think it's a combination of things. I'm not going to blame the Prime Minister entirely, although she accepted full responsibility in a very generous letter she sent to me and the other 32 who were also defeated. So she accepts that there is some responsibility. We can't just blame the Prime Minister. I think that the way in which the manifesto was launched, I think the way in which it was written, and I think a number of other factors came into play which did not help our campaigning. And of course, you have to remember that the Labour Party campaigned particularly well.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I'm not interested in the Labour Party today. I'm not talking about that. Mr Rees-Mogg, the Prime Minister accepted responsibility for Mr Carmichael and others losing their seats. Is that fair?
Well, if she accepted it, that's what she did. Yes, that's a perfectly fair thing for leaders to do. And it's a sign of strong leadership that you take responsibility when things go less well than you hoped, as well as when they're very successful. So I think she deserves credit for being honest and straightforward.
Some of your colleagues are saying she's delusional today, to think that she'll be able to hang on until 2022.
Well, I think loyalty has long been the Tory party's secret weapon, but one that's been a bit of abeyance recently. And I think it's important to back our leader. It's important to have clarity and stability during the Brexit negotiations, that Mrs May is doing a good job in those negotiations. She is offering leadership and clarity of purpose, but above all, she's doing her duty. It can't be easy to be Prime Minister at the moment, and she is putting the interests of the nation ahead of her own personal interests and the responsibility that she has taken to offer us good leadership. And I think that's really impressive and deserves support.
Decent Brexit deal is what you need, Mr Carmichael, as a party in order for the Prime Minister to stay in post. Do you agree?
Yes, I do think we need a good outcome from the Brexit negotiations. I think that it's really important that we signal that we can land well once we leave the European Union, because that's one of the key issues that's actually around at the moment. Does the business world feel comfortable with it? And what about the rest of the EU 27? We've got to have good relationships with them when we leave. It's going to be necessary actually to have good relationships with them now, because the sort of the deals that we want will require acceptance and support from the EU 27. And then, of course, there's this question of what we do about trade deals beyond the European Union, and we can see that obviously in Japan, for example, there is concern, as expressed by the Japanese government, that some issues need to be clearer, more transparent than they currently are. Now, I think all of that adds up to a very difficult few months ahead. Not that it's going to derail Brexit necessarily, but that what we do need to make sure is that we're very clear about what we are intending to do. And I think the Prime Minister is best placed to do that of all the other possibilities and contentions.
Interestingly, Mr Rees-Mogg, the Labour Party is waiting in the wings, is it not, for your party to tear itself apart? If not the Prime Minister's fault, then whose?
Well, a moment ago you didn't want to talk about the Labour Party, but as we get on to
I'm not talking about the Labour Party. No, Mr Rees-Mogg. Mr Rees-Mogg, I'm not talking about the Labour Party. I'm saying that they are waiting for you to tear yourself apart as a party. I'm glad you both think it's funny, because you've only got 6-seat majority. It's not great, is it?
Yeah. Well, what you're saying about the Labour Party is that they're the opposition, and it's perfectly obvious. Of course they would like to take over, but they're hugely divided on this. They change their policy as often as most people change their underpants. They have no idea what they're doing on Brexit. They're not fit to be in government. Their position is absurd.
Yeah, but they did terribly well in the last election, didn't they?
The Labour Party did well. The Conservatives got the highest share of the vote since 1983. But what's really interesting about the last election is that we've gone back to a two-party system, and that the minority parties were really washed away in the last election. And that's brought us back to a type of politics that we haven't had since the early 70s, and that will have long-term consequences on how policy and politics are conducted in the UK. And of course the Labour Party views itself as an alternative government. But if it is, it's not a serious one.
Your leader thought it was a walk in the park. That's why she called the election when she did. That's why Mr Carmichael, although he thinks it's funny, lost his seat. And that's why you had to rely on the DUP in order to be in power.
Well, actually, the Conservative vote went up as a share of the popular vote in the election. There were difficulties with the campaign. It would be foolish to pretend otherwise. The DUP are a very respectable party in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom. It is perfectly reasonable for them to support the government that there is, and Mrs May leads that, and long may she continue to lead that. She is doing her duty, and she's doing it calmly and intelligently.
Let's bring in the views of, that's the parliamentary party. They both think it's pretty funny. What do the Tory grassroots think? Let's speak to the co-editor of The Conservative Woman, Laura Perrins. Hello to you, Laura. Thanks for joining us. The two chaps that we've just been talking to think it's quite funny that we should be talking about the Labour Party, not talking about the Labour Party, whether they should change their underpants or not. We might be looking for a new Prime Minister very soon.
So I think the most important question here, Kay, is what is in the interests of Britain, what's in the best interest of the country as a whole. And clearly, it would not be in Britain's best interest for Theresa May to lead the Conservative Party into the next election. It's true that they need stability and they need to close out these Brexit negotiations, but this is an incredibly serious time for Britain. They must take control of these Brexit negotiations, and there are other significant issues that will go on in the economy in the background, and eventually the party must select a new leader that is a firmly conservative leader, knows what he or she is talking about, and has firm conservative principles both on the economy, on Europe and on social matters also.
Yeah, incredibly serious time for the country, Mr Carmichael. No laughing matter.
You're absolutely right. It is a very serious issue for the party. What Jacob and I were laughing about was the sudden change back to the Labour Party when you told us we weren't supposed to talk about the Labour Party. But the actual serious issue is actually very much connected with Brexit and connected with our national interests and connected with our long-term prospects outside of the European Union. These are big issues. There are involving a huge number of tectonic plates, and they're all moving. And of course, we've got to navigate the consequences of those movements. And that is, I think, where we need strong and effective leadership. It's where we need a kind of a narrative. And I think the Prime Minister will be extremely wise to take the opportunity when she has it at the next party conference, which is in October, to actually sketch out her vision, not just about Brexit, though that's important, but about what kind of Britain she intends to have and how she's going to get us to that point. Because that was something else that was absent during the general election, and which I think the country really needs to know about. So the serious point is, actually, this is about how our nation actually responds to all of these challenges ahead of us, which are coming along each and every month, and also how it is that we sketch out a role for ourselves beyond the European Union. And I think those two things are obviously interconnected, but continue to have very weighty questions behind them.
Final word to you, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Neil's analysis has a lot to commend it. We need a Conservative government that gets on with the business of getting a good deal as we leave the European Union, that is able to conduct the negotiations satisfactorily and ensures that by the end of March 2019 we have left the European Union in accordance with the wishes of the British people, something the Labour Party seems quite incapable of understanding. So I think there's a good deal of agreement between us, and we need good Conservative government on the basis of Conservative principles, and that, I think, is what Mrs May is offering.
Thanks to all of you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Let's see who's smiling at the end of party conference season. OK, in response to the Prime Minister's remarks, we conducted a Sky Data Snap poll to gauge the public's reaction. We asked if you think it would be good or bad for the Conservative Party if Theresa May is the leader at the next general election. 45% of people said they thought it would be a bad thing for the Tories. 28% said it would be a good thing. 18% said it would be neither good nor bad. We then asked, would you be more or less likely to vote Tory if Theresa May resigned as party leader? 17% said they'd be more likely to vote Tory. 9% said they'd be less likely to vote for the party, whereas 64% said it would make absolutely no difference to them. Former Deputy Prime Minister and Conservative peer Lord Heseltine cast doubt on Mrs May's future when he spoke to us earlier.
I don't think it's realistic that she will lead the Conservative Party into the next election. I think that we have probably a 2-year window before the next election. Anyone's guess, but my guess is 2 years. And that 2 years will be dominated by 3 issues. First, the economic situation, which is going to decline. Secondly, the levels of immigration, which are at the centre of the Brexit debate. And then, of course, the Brexit negotiations themselves, which are already humiliating.
So, should she stay or should she go before the next election? George Eaton, the political editor of The New Statesman, is in our Westminster studio, and Tim Stanley, leader writer at The Telegraph, joining us from the paper's newsroom. Hello to you both. Thanks for joining us on Sky News. George, to you first of all, one of the senior party figures, who we won't quote directly, but said that she was delusional if she thought she could hang on. What do you think?
Well, I don't think she's necessarily delusional, because I don't think she does think she'll fight the next election. I think it was what she thought was the best answer to give to a surprise question. I think she is still of the view that she will remain leader as long as her party will have her, and her party has no intention of letting her fight another general election, having seen how she performed earlier this year. But I also think for the country it wouldn't be the right thing, because I think, frankly, the voters deserve a better choice. And we saw at the general election this year that Theresa May didn't have much of a vision or much of an offer. And I think she'll be in a far weaker position in a few years' time. And I also think there is actually a national interest in her remaining Prime Minister for now, but not fighting another election, because it will enable her to make some of the difficult, unpopular choices that will have to be made if Britain's to get a reasonable Brexit deal.
Tim Stanley?
She's going to have to say that she's going to stay, even if she doesn't stay, right? Because she's got to say it in order to reduce domestic tensions. She's got to say it so that foreign powers negotiating with her know that she's in it for the long haul and that they're speaking to someone with authority. She also has to say it because she is right now the only MP in Parliament with any constitutional mandate to lead this country, because even if she didn't win the election by the amount she wanted to, she still won it and no one else did. But But also, some word is coming back from MPs after their summer holidays, and some of them are saying that they feel she's been given time, she seems relatively apologetic, and they're happy for her to continue leading the country through, let us not forget, the EU negotiations, to change horse midstream, to trigger some kind of leadership ballot while Britain is going through that very difficult period would be very reckless and a very un-Tory thing to do. So even if she doesn't end up leading this country through to the next general election, as I say, I think it's probably right that she gives the impression that that's what she intends to do.
If she gets a decent Brexit deal, or looks as though she's going to get one, George Eaton, despite the best efforts of George Osborne and his newspaper to chop her legs off, does that mean that she could potentially stay on for some time?
I think it's unlikely. I think a natural time for her to depart would be after the Brexit negotiations conclude, which is due to be March 2019, or shortly afterwards, because I think the Conservatives will want a new leader in place some years in advance of the next general election, which is scheduled for 2022. Of course, there may well be an election before that, but I think it's very unlikely that, as I've said, the Tories will let Theresa May fight that.
Tim Stanley?
What George says does make a lot of sense. There was some talk a few weeks ago about the conference being make or break and about her using her speech to apologise and try to move on, and MPs waiting to see how she performed at it. On the other hand, I'm really reluctant to make any predictions at all because, of course, about 18 months ago, we probably all thought that David Cameron was going to happily retire from being Prime Minister after winning an EU referendum and that George Osborne would slip into his position. Instead, where are we? Well, David Cameron had to resign in disgrace and George Osborne is now editing a free newspaper in London. So we really can't predict what's going to happen. We think right now Theresa May looks weak, but who knows? If the negotiations go well, if the country grows to respect rather than love her, it's not impossible that she'll lead this country into the next general election, although I too doubt it.
Oof, oof, take that, George Osborne. As far as the party is concerned, though, if not her, George Eaton, then whom?
Well, that is the question. And I think if there was an outstanding alternative in the wings, then Theresa May would have gone already. But let's look at the candidates. Boris Johnson is increasingly regarded by MPs and by the public as a joke that isn't funny anymore. David Davis is rather Brexit-worn and absorbed by that and seen as perhaps too much a figure of the past. Amber Rudd has a majority of only 376. If she became leader, then Labour activists would pour into her seat to try and get rid of her, which is why some Tory MPs think what's needed is to keep Theresa May in place for now and nurture some of the younger talents in the party. And they mention MPs such as Johnny Mercer, Tom Tugendhat, who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, James Cleverly, and then there's Ruth Davidson, who is the one sort of proven Tory winner at the moment. She dramatically increased the Conservatives' number of seats in Scotland at the general election. And some suggest that a veteran such as Nicholas Soames, someone from a similar wing of the party, should make room for her, and she can come down to Westminster from Holyrood and try and revive the Tories' fortunes. But the point is, as you all have noticed, there isn't a single name or single individual who's the answer to the Tories' woes at the moment. They need a bit longer to find out who might be.
Tim Stanley, I mean, Lord Heseltine's saying she's got a couple of years at the very most. Hearing there from George the list of people who may or may not have their names in the frame. Remember, of course, though, that David Cameron, he was never going to win, was he? But he did against David Davis.
Absolutely, you're completely correct. Lord Heseltine, of course, is very good at trying to drag down Tory Prime Ministers. That's largely because he didn't become one himself. He's also a rather bitter Remainer, and that comes across in what he has to say. A lot of the people that George mentioned, James Cleverly, Tom Tugendhat, I know and admire. I wouldn't rule out some of the big beasts, though. I very strongly disagree with his description of Boris Johnson, who I personally think is doing a great job and who I think is still liked a lot by the people of this country. I think the issue will be whether Britain proceeds with a politician associated with Leave strongly or with Remain. Right now, there's a feeling that Philip Hammond speaks for those sort of Remainers who are in favour of soft Brexit, the kind of Amber Rudd type people. And on the other hand, David Davis, Boris Johnson could very easily represent Leave. But a lot of those younger people who George mentioned, as I said, very talented, but people haven't heard of them. And they might not get a chance to show off their talents because we're all going to be so fixated upon the Brexit process. That's yet another reason why Theresa May probably will be in power a little bit longer than expected, because simply this story is going to eclipse everything else, and it's difficult to think of how other people get a chance to shine.
Yeah, I mean, George, although the party is well known for being ruthless, it's not stupid, and it realises, presumably, that a new leader or a fight for a new leader now and potentially another election can only be good for the opposition. Absolutely, and the Conservative MPs do sincerely believe that Jeremy Corbyn would be disastrous for the country's economy, and in some cases they see him as a genuine threat to national security. And so an early election is the last thing they want. But I also think that Theresa May is living on borrowed time. I think she is still only one catastrophic event or misstep or a Grenfell-style gaffe from being removed. And when Tory MPs want to remove a leader, they can do so very, very swiftly. You only need a couple of dozen letters to go to the head of the 1922 committee, Graham Brady, sent anonymously, to trigger a vote of no confidence. And we saw how quickly Margaret Thatcher was removed. But given the dominance of the Brexit negotiations, this is not an ideal time for that to happen, which is why I think Theresa May is safe for now. And the other key point to make is that it's the Brexiteer wing of the Conservative Party who are now most loyal to Theresa May, because she is sticking to what's become known as hard Brexit. She wants not just to remove Britain from the EU, but from the single market and the customs union as well. And that is a position that the Brexiteer wing of the Conservatives are determined will remain. Hardline-ish. Tim, we've got a minute left on your line. Your final thoughts?
George is absolutely right. Brexiteers right now do see Theresa May as useful. But on the other hand, they also want greater enthusiasm from the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is very good at talking about the risks and managing the risks of Brexit. But a lot of MPs who support Brexit would actually rather like to see the government championing it and talking about how Britain can do well once it leaves the European Union. Perhaps Japan was a turning point with the promise of a new future trade deal, but that's exactly the kind of thing the Prime Minister needs to cheer up about and get out there and actually promote with some vim and some vigour.
I'm sure you're both looking forward to party conference season, gentlemen. We'll let you get on. It's good of you to take the time to talk to us here on Sky News this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Theresa May has said she's not a quitter and repeated her pledge to lead the Conservatives in the next general election. Speaking in Japan, Mrs May said the public wanted her to get on with the job. She's supported by some senior Conservatives, but others have questioned whether she will still be leader in 5 years' time. Our correspondent Ben Wright has been travelling with the Prime Minister, and his report does contain some flash photography.
They're two Prime Ministers in tune. Shinzo Abe has rolled out a very warm welcome for Theresa May on this three-day trip. Whether Mrs May's reception will be quite so generous when she gets back to Westminster is another matter, after the surprise pledge to lead Britain and her party into the next general election, a vow repeated today.
I said I wasn't a quitter, and there's a long-term job to do. There's an important job to be done in the United Kingdom. We stand at a really critical time in the UK.
This fighting talk comes only 3 months after Mrs May called a snap election and lost her party's majority. But with Brexit negotiations underway and no obvious rival in sight, most but not all Tories seem willing to let her carry on for now.
We've made a decision. We want Theresa May to get on with the job. We think it's an important job. It's critically important for the country that we get the right outcomes.
I don't see any immediate change, but I think it's unrealistic to plan on the assumption that Theresa May is going to be fighting the next election as leader of the Conservative Party.
I don't think Theresa May will stand down of her own accord. She would need to have a challenger to go forward to her. She is not a quitter. She's very resilient, and she will be there for as long as the Conservative Party want her to be.
Given North Korea's latest missile test over this island, defence was a focus of talks here, as was Brexit, with Japan anxious to protect its investments in Britain.
On Brexit, we would like the impact on our companies minimised. We want predictability and transparency ensured during the negotiations. Mrs May says she's listening so that a smooth Brexit transition is realised.
It's the long-term issues of trade, the consequences of Brexit, defence and security cooperation that have dominated Theresa May's talks here. But it's her unplanned, strikingly blunt declaration about her own political future that her trip to Japan will be remembered for. Ben Wright, BBC News, Tokyo.
Well, those Brexit struggles have put yet more pressure on Theresa May's leadership. She had been expected to see her party through the negotiations before handing over to somebody else. But speaking during her trip to Japan, she suggested that she will stay on. And that sparked more disquiet within her party, as our political correspondent Emily Morgan reports.
She came here to cement our allegiance with Japan, and today Theresa May tried to refocus the agenda on just that. But after visiting a naval base, the Prime Minister was asked again why she was determined to stay in her job after Brexit and beyond.
There's a long-term job to do. There's an important job to be done in the United Kingdom. We stand at a really critical time in the UK. Yes, that's partly about Brexit and getting Brexit right. You know, I think for most members of the public, they would say they want the government to get on with the job, and that's exactly what I and the government are doing.
It's widely reported she had, though, reassured her party she'd see the Brexit negotiations through and move on. Many high-profile Conservative MPs lost their seats in the election. Former Minister Rob Wilson was one.
Naturally, I'm very disappointed.
He told me Theresa May has a lot to prove.
Can she learn from her mistakes and make the transition that's needed to fight the campaign for the next election? And that is an open question in the Conservative Party.
It's an open question in the Conservative Party, but what's the answer?
Well, the answer is that people can change. People can learn from their mistakes and they can do better.
Mr Wilson worked for George Osborne and his former boss wasn't so kind. His newspaper's editorial reads, like the living dead in a second-rate horror film, the premiership of Theresa May staggers on oblivious. For the country, it means we continue to have a rudderless government when we face huge challenges beyond Brexit. It may surprise some, but that's not the view of those with the power to unseat her.
The leadership question isn't something that my colleagues in the Parliamentary Conservative Party are talking about. We've made a decision. We want Theresa May to get on with the job.
Publicly, Conservatives appear to be behind the Prime Minister since there is no appetite for a leadership contest, let alone a general election. What some are saying in private, though, is very different. No one I've spoken to expects Theresa May to lead the party into the next election. She made a toast to friends this evening in Japan, and in the coming weeks and months at home, she will need all she can get. Emily Morgan, ITV News in Westminster.
Well, our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is travelling with the Prime Minister and is in Tokyo now. So, Carl, Theresa May hasn't had much good news from Brussels or London. Is it going any better for her in Japan?
Well, up to a point, I think it is. Yes, she has achieved one of her main aims on this trip, and that is to get the Japanese government to commit in writing to using a trade deal they are about to sign with the European Union as the model for a trade deal with the UK after Brexit. Now, it may seem quite a low hurdle to have cleared, to have got them to offer us a deal that we would have had anyway if we'd stayed in the European Union. But given that Japan is such a large investor in the UK economy, I do think it's fairly significant that Theresa May has achieved this.
But Carl, moving beyond trade, the crisis over the latest North Korea missile test is presumably also a focus for their talks.
Yes, and this is a bigger challenge. Now, Japan and Great Britain do seem to be involved in moves to toughen up the sanctions regime against North Korea. There are talks going on in the United Nations at the moment, and what we understand is that they would involve something approaching a full-scale oil embargo against North Korea. Now, that is difficult because it would be such a serious embargo, it could destabilize the entire regime in Pyongyang. And that's one thing that China does not want. They don't want instability on their border, so China may well move to block that at the Security Council. It would be more difficult to achieve.
OK, Carl Dinnan in Tokyo. Thank you.